Helen, what is Pilates?
Well, that's a really broad question. So it can cover all scopes of things. You've got mat, you've got equipment, you've got rehab, you've got group fitness classes, you've got church hall, everyone on a mat. I mean, it can literally be if you've had surgery, if you're an athlete, it can be for anything. There's kind of no real definition of it because everybody's taken it and turned it into so many different things. What I think Pilates is it is, you know, if you take it right back to why it came about, it was originally called contrology. So it was about control of the mind, body and spirit. So for me, that means how you move yourself, how you create this mind-body connection so you know where you are in space, which gives you good things like good posture. And it gives you that kind of mindfulness or calmness so that you can really understand what your body's doing, where your brain is with it, and how they can all link together. So that's what I think Pilates is.
So it's like a system of exercises that covers all those things. It sounds a little bit like yoga from what you're saying. Is it the same as yoga?
Yeah, so yoga is, so it can be, is the reality. And Pilates can be done with just a mat, which is where you generally get bigger group classes. They're a bit cheaper, you do it at home, or it can use equipment. So mat Pilates has elements of yoga in it. They have similar positions that look the same and sometimes are taught similarly. Yoga tends to be a lot more transitional in its movement. You don't tend to do one exercise for a long time. You tend to move between positions and poses a lot more. Whereas in Pilates, it's got a little bit more of a kind of strength focus on specific areas before you move into full body integration. Whereas yoga tends to sit more on that full body integration right from the beginning. And then Pilates as well, you've got the complete other opposite, which is the equipment side. So the equipment side, most people know the reformer. You've then got the trap table or Cadillac, the ladder barrel, the spine corrector, the chair. And all of those use a system of springs which give you resistance. And that resistance can either assist your movement and encourage you to do more, or it can resist your movement and make it harder. Mm-hmm. But the concept is the same, whether you're mat or equipment. It's you tend to do an exercise and you might build up into it and have a bit of prep for it. But the aim is to get to that exercise to then move through, and you will generally have a structure of moving from either standing to standing, or from lying back up into standing for you to walk out the door. Whereas yoga tends to be a lot more standing work, and then at the end you finish with the mindfulness, the stretching, and the kind of the thing that I absolutely adore, that shavasana where you just sleep and you congratulate yourself for getting through the session. So that's the kind of similarities and differences.
So you've got the equipment in Pilates, there's no real equipment in yoga. The only sort of equivalent might be props that you use. So they might be like the small equipment that we have in Pilates.
Yeah.
But none of the big machinery.
Exactly. So when I do yoga, I often use blocks because I'm not that flexible. What tends to happen is the really flexible people gravitate towards yoga. It's like a kind of self-selecting thing. And the people who are stiffer, a bit like me, tend to gravitate towards Pilates because the equipment particularly the equipment, it allows you to do more. But also on the mat, if you don't necessarily have the flexibility, you can modify the movement to make it smaller. In yoga, if you don't have the flexibility to get into positions, you end up feeling like me and wanting to hide in the background because you just can't quite get there because you can't touch your toes, you're not flexible, and you're still getting lots out of the positions. But a lot of the time that feeling stops people from going because they're like, well, I'm really stiff, everyone else is really bendy, this isn't for me.
Yeah, I actually think people think that they have to be flexible already to do yoga.
Yes.
Which isn't true, despite what you're saying. Do you think that people think the same thing about Pilates before they've tried it?
Yeah, I think both have a general self-selecting thing. So most people who do Pilates, they know it from big reformer fitness classes. They're expecting to get a six-pack. They are looking for real strength and gain. They're not looking to get flexible. They might be looking to maybe improve their posture. That tends to be the thing that comes up. Or maybe loosen off their hamstrings a little bit. But what often would be really good is that stiffer people like myself would benefit from doing a bit more yoga, where you are effectively forcing your body without help into different positions. And the more bendy people who do yoga would benefit from getting more of the control and the like breaking that movement down and really looking at the mechanical side of it that you get from doing Pilates.
And I think there's another similarity, which I find in yoga. I think of it as being really good for spinal mobility.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe the mat Pilates, you might have a little bit of it in there, but it's not so much. But the thing that's really stood out about the equipment Pilates and learning the repertoire is how much spinal mobility there is, how much you go into really deep flexion, so bending poses and back bends and things like that, but with the assistance of the equipment so that you can do it.
Yeah.
Whereas you maybe can't do it unassisted in your yoga class, but they do have that similarity, which I hadn't necessarily seen before because I was thinking more of like just the strength element. Yeah, and
I think it's interesting because for me, I always find my limiting factor with yoga is quite simply my hamstring length, my hamstring and calf length. And I can't touch my toes. On a good day, I can get that maybe 2 inches away from it. But the majority of the time, I'm sort of like down at the bottom of my leggings. That is really within normal limits, and I'm not, unflexible. But I always find when I do a lot of these positions, I can't achieve the stretch from my lower legs that allow me to get into it. Whereas in the Pilates, I can get that spinal mobility, I can get that hip mobility, but because I'm given a little bit back somewhere else, like bending my knees, then I can take a little bit more from somewhere else, which means I get then the benefit. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to do yoga well and have to modify it as much as I have to modify it because I'm just not that flexible. Which is why I tend to gravitate more towards Pilates, because I get a much better sense of achievement when I do it.
People get quite fixated on touching their toes though, don't they?
Yeah.
Do you think you need to be able to touch your toes?
No, I don't think you do. I don't have back pain, I don't have hip pain, I don't have leg pain, I don't have, any issues with it. I've never been able to touch my toes. So when I was little, I couldn't, I definitely could when I was a baby, but, the minute I can remember touching my toes, I was never able to do it. So part of it is probably that my genetic makeup is such that I'm a bit stiffer, which means that I have a bit more spring, I can produce a bit more power, but I can't, fold over into things. So when I do things like a long sit in Pilates, I bend my knees. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, because I'm not bending my knees to make it easier. I'm bending my knees in a way that keeps the stiffness and the tension in the body, which allows me to produce the power somewhere else. And I think, so I've used the word tension and stiffness. Lots of people are like, oh my God, I don't want to be stiff. But actually that is really, really important to understand. And Pilates gives you quite a bit of this, because it's almost like if you had a bow and arrow and the string, so the string that I pull back, it's mobile enough that I can pull it back. But when I let it go and it pings back, it's stiff enough that it comes back and recoils and comes back into the same place. It's not this floppy little thing that just kind of goes bleh, so that the arrow just falls at your feet. It's got stiffness so that as it moves through space, it can create force to propel that arrow forward. And actually, when you look at and you break down some of the stuff that Pilates does, and you really look into the mechanics and get really super geeky about it like I do, then it really does promote that positive stiffness and tension that people want in order to hold yourself up against gravity, to have good posture, to create the ability to do a movement in the gym so you can start producing more force.
So you're kind of talking about stiffness is a good thing.
Yeah.
Do we need flexibility at all then? Gets a bit confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah, you do. And so everybody has a natural, everyone has a natural range of movement they can do. And that's based on what your skeleton is, pretty much. So how you are made and the angle of your joints and how things are held together. And some people are more bendy because they have kind of certain substances in their body that make their muscles and tendons and things stretch a little bit more, and some people don't. Either way, it's not a bad thing. Being stiffer will lead you to certain things and might make you feel like, oh, you got to do that at the end of a day or something like that. And being more bendy might make you feel that when you get muscular contraction, you suddenly feel really, really stiff, so you just stretch all the time. But it also leads you to other problems because suddenly you're really bendy, so you've got to work through this huge range of motion, which means you've got to be stronger in a much bigger place. My range of movement, like I said, I can't touch my toes, is smaller, which means my strength doesn't have to go all the way out into a split and all the way back down again. It's got to get me roughly to my toes and back up. So you need flexibility, because if you didn't have mobility in your skeleton and in your body, you wouldn't be able to look behind you, twist to make sure you're not getting knocked over as you cross the road. How much you have, a little bit, a lot, it'll all lead to problems. Or not problems, but it will all lead you to feeling certain things.
And I think you make a really good point about that sort of strength at the end of range. People only think about stretching and they only think about getting further. They don't really know that you need strength in your muscles when they're at length, which just stretching them doesn't do. So you have to do kind of active movements at the end of range, which is different to just stretching.
Yeah, and it's this. If you think about it, if I have an elastic band and I stretch it and then I let go, it comes back to where it was. You cannot fundamentally change where your muscles come from and go to. You can't. So because you can't change that, and so your beginning and end point is the same, if the bit in the middle is really, really loose, you end up with this floppy mess that has no recoil, has no bounce, has no power, can't push yourself forward, can't push yourself upstairs. So they don't come together. So you can stretch till you're blue in the face. You have to stretch an awful lot to increase mobility and to increase flexibility. But if you don't strengthen yourself in that range of movement, you're never gonna change. And that's the nice thing about Pilates. So particularly with the springs, so I specialize much more around the equipment side, and we do mat stuff which people can then take home. But the equipment, the way the springs work is you are working, your muscles are getting longer as you're resisting the springs in certain directions to then contract and get shorter in other directions. So the way you design the program means that you can really train that eccentric load to focus on the muscles getting longer and stronger, which gives people that much more upright feeling, that feeling of being looser. But it's not because they've stretched, it's because they've strengthened. Yeah,
so that eccentric, let's just come over that a little bit for people. Yeah. So concentric is the phase where your muscle shortens during a contraction.
Yeah.
So this is my biceps doing a concentric action.
Yeah.
And then eccentric, there needs to be some control there, otherwise I'll drop whatever I'm carrying. So my muscle is lengthening under tension. And that's quite different to just me stretching the muscle.
Yes,
so it's that lengthening under tension, the eccentric phase of the muscle, which is really good for both flexibility, but also having that strength through the range.
Yeah, so if you're looking at like the abdominals and you're doing a sit-up, you might come up. The eccentric component is the really slowly lowering yourself back down again. That's the component. So how you...
But most people won't realise they're doing something on the way down. They just think it's all about the...
I'm going to get up, I'm going to get up, I'm going to get up.
But you need to be able to control the way down, otherwise...
Yes, and actually that's how we, suddenly, we step off of a curb and suddenly stop because a bicycle goes past us. That sudden, deceleration, the ability to, pull back, that comes from a lot of that. So it's a really important skill, and often you see people kind of using a lot of speed to do some of the movements in Pilates, and this is where it's like, well, what is Pilates and what is it not? Pilates will not give you power. Okay, so if you want to lift 100 kilos, if you want to throw a ball really, really far, if you want to throw your kids really high into the air, that's not Pilates. Because power is strength, pure strength, which means you're in the gym lifting sort of your 6 to 8 reps.
And it has to be a heavy
And
weight.
it is
it's like
heavy.
60, 70, 80, 90% of the maximum thing that you can do.
You're getting to 4 reps and you are struggling, and you're doing that set 5 times. So it's pure strength, adding in speed. So you might, for example, do a really heavy exercise in the gym, like a big squat, and then the next exercise might be a squat jump. So you've got that power, that spring, that speed. Those together is what gives you power. Pilates will not give you that because it cannot load you heavy enough.
No, but we have just said that it's strengthening you.
Yeah.
And it's strengthening you in particular. It's good for the eccentric part.
Yes.
So what do we mean by strength when we're talking Pilates? Because it is a bit of strength.
Yeah. And it's this, you know, I'm a big believer in understanding what something is and what something isn't. So if we take out the fact that Pilates is not going to make you powerful, okay? Mm-hmm. If we're going to talk about strength, you can talk about strength in lots of different ways. So it gives you the strength around your stability. That's kind of what it gives you. It's that control. So it's all those, you know, people talk about this deep burn, muscles they've never felt before working. That's your stability. Now they get stronger because they're like little marathon runners that are constantly doing a little bit all day, every day. So they are working all the time. You can bias those a lot more in Pilates because we can break that movement down in order to, you know, maybe work around the hip and the lateral hip a bit more, or the outside of the hip. So you can take off some of the upper body stuff to put a bit more focus on the leg in order to make those marathon runners work even harder, hence that really deep burn. It will also give you the mechanics, and this is really important because if your mechanics are terrible, you won't be able to lift, okay? The first thing anybody teaches you in the gym is how to do a good hip hinge, for example. Now, if you've done something like Pilates, everyone knows how to do it because you do it all the time.
In loads of the exercises. And we have a fancy word for it, which is dissociation.
Yeah.
Which is being able to move one body part while keeping the other one still.
Yeah.
And that is how hinges work, and that is how your hip hinge works.
Exactly. So that is in your squat, it is your hip moving in your, like around your pelvis. In your deadlift, it's your pelvis moving over your hip. So that simple thing happens in loads of the things we do. When we go upstairs, when we come downstairs, when we sit down, when we stand. A sit to stand is just a squat. So that happens all the time. So when you're talking about the strength that Pilates gives you, it's kind of like this. This is how I describe it to people. If you want to jump really, really high, you need to get in the gym and do some strength training. If you want to land and control the landing and make sure that your feet and your hips and your knees and everything absorbs that force and you control that landing, you do Pilates. So,
and practice landing.
And practice landing, yeah. So it's kind of that, you know, it won't give you the ability to throw far, but it will give you the ability for all your muscles to have worked through their full capacity and range, both really long as they can get and as short as they can get, which then means when you add in those powerful movements in order to throw something, you will be held together much better. And that is what it does. It holds you together. It gives you that kind of postural awareness, and if you're very deconditioned, you've had surgery, you've got, you know, you're recovering from an illness, you're recovering from injury.
There's been a lockdown.
You haven't ever exercised before and you're trying to get into something like that. You've taken a massive break. Of course, it will give you general strength. But when you look at what power is and when you look at what general strength is to be able to do normal activities, that's where the difference comes in. And that's what's really important. So if you want to be able to throw something really far, get in the gym and lift some weight.
But you're also talking about, which I think is important for people to understand as well, is there are different functions that our muscles have.
Yes.
So some of our muscles are specialised for producing strength, and they tend to be the bigger muscles, the more superficial muscles, so the ones that you can see, like your biceps muscles and your quads. But underneath all of those and closer to the skeleton, there's all these muscles that you describe as the marathon runners. But their job is to hold us up against gravity, to stabilise the joint so there's not too much movement there, and just they're gently active all the time to make us more efficient at moving. They're like the foundations which a house is built on, and they tend to need lots of repetitions, but we don't really need to load them. And so you're training those muscles in Pilates, and I think of that as the core, which goes throughout the whole body, and this is kind of the misconception of what the core is, because it's become the abdominals. For some people they think, oh well, maybe it's the deep abdominals, which are stabilizing muscles, but for lots of people, especially going to fitness classes and things, they think it's your abs.
And you know, we get all the time, I've come to see you because I need to strengthen my core because I've got back pain. And in my head, fundamentally, I understand what somebody's saying, but you need to expand on that. So like you were saying, it's your foundation, it's your building blocks, all these marathon runners. It's like you're getting a gentle cuddle every time you're moving. So your core is that entire system. It is all the way from your fingertips to your head down to your feet. It's everything that works together to give you that gentle cuddle to allow you to do more, so that your global muscles can be like, yeah, I'm here, I'm going to do some stuff. And the other ones are like, yeah, I'm just going to chill out and help you a little bit. And that's really important, because neither of them can do each other's job. You need each of them, and they need each other. So working on both, particularly as a normal person, we're going to take elite athletes out of this. If you work on this as a normal person, you will feel like you can lift more, you will feel like you have got more ease in your normal daily life, you feel like you've got better posture, like you understand where you are in space. All of this kind of stuff will come together naturally to help you. Elite athletes are a very, very different thing, because they have to train very specifically. So sometimes doing some of this work is actually detrimental to them, because they've made very big physiological adaptations to their spine, to their discs and stuff, which means that you don't necessarily want to do some of this work.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because if you've got a rugby player who his job is to hit a front row in a scrum, and he's going to have 900 kilos coming at him, and he's got another 800 kilos coming from behind him, and he's got this compressive force, and he has to hit people hard, he is a stiffer human being. Suddenly, and his discs in his back are designed to be stiffer. Suddenly start stretching him, and you're going to reduce some of that adaptation he's made to do his job. So you have to understand that elite athletes do very different things to a normal person.
But on that note, you started your journey into Pilates working with elite athletes and specifically rugby players. And you were doing equipment Pilates with them. So what did you do with them what did you not do with them that you would do with someone else?
So we didn't do stretching. Really simple.
But you did Pilates.
We did Pilates, but we didn't do stretching. So
not right to the end of the range.
So no, it would be to the end of the range, but it's like, if I set up a chain of dominoes and I kick one over, eventually the next lot come. So what we would do is a lot of kind of technical work. So for example, if you're in feet and straps, so you're lying on the reformer, your feet are in these loops, and you're kind of going up and down with your straps, and everyone's kind of having a lovely time because they're getting a nice stretch and their bum's lifting off and cracking on, and it's all wonderful. So what we would do is go, okay, actually no, let's look at the focus of this kind of stuff. So what are we trying to achieve in any given exercise? Right, I want to get a hip hinge. So at what point can the player's legs come up? And at what point is their stop point? I.e., when is the next domino about to fall? And then we pause. Because that is You don't
no
keep
more
going,
to give. Yeah, higher, go further.
Because there's no point. You've got no more to give because the next bit that you're giving is coming from somewhere else. So it was very much that technical awareness so that when they understood hip hinges and that sort of thing, they could take that into the gym and they could lift more, they could prevent injuries, they could do that kind of stuff, which was amazing. We used it for all their prehab work. We used it for all of their pre-operation work. So like if they had had a big injury and we were looking to try and get a little bit more range or something like that before they did surgery, we would use it a lot. Immediately post-op, so when they've had their operation and they are non-weight bearing, partial weight bearing, that kind of stuff, the equipment is just incredible for that. Because your aim with an elite athlete is to try and get them back on the pitch as quickly as possible. So you have all day, every day to kind of do all this stuff with them. The principles are the same with somebody who is normal, who's had a operation as well. The less you do, the more deconditioned you become, the harder it is to get back to the level you were at. However, if you are partial weight bearing, if you are non-weight bearing, the springs are less than body weight. You don't even have to, you can spring up the equipment and change the exercise and do the things so that you're not even putting pressure on the knee. If you, for example, done your ACL, you've been skiing, fell over, done your ACL, and you've ended up with a stiff knee or your knee doesn't straighten properly, that will limit you in what you can achieve later on. Suddenly using the equipment, you can make it less than body weight. So there's your partial weight bearing. So from day dot, you can get going and you can work into that full range and then the springs can pull you into that bend. So it will encourage, it's like an active range of movement exercise in less than weight bearing, and it's better than doing that and just bending and straightening your knee.
And trying to like work against your own body
it and
to get that range of movement. The machine does it for you. So it's a bit like the continuous passive machines that you used to have on orthopedic wards, but better.
Yes, pretty much, because you're doing it for yourself.
Because it's not passive.
And you're getting the control right from the beginning. So because you're working your muscles, then there is less deconditioning, which means you can generally get back to things a little bit quicker. But you're not doing things, effectively against, like if you're sitting down and just moving your leg, there's a little bit of gravity in there, but it's significantly less than body weight. Nothing's going to work hard enough, and it's going to be harder to challenge your end of ranges. So to challenge when that next domino falls over. And instead you're going to compensate. Whereas what you can do is you can literally look at someone and you go, I know you can't bend your knee because your hip's coming off and your foot's going forward. You can see it. Not only can you see it, they can feel it. And that feedback is so unbelievably important, because the way I feel about Pilates is if you came and saw me, you're not going to see me for the rest of my life. You're going to get really bored. I'm going to get really bored. And hopefully you'll get better than that. Whereas actually what we want is I want to give you the tools and the education and the understanding that what you learn in Pilates, you can take to group classes, HIIT classes, running. You can take it anywhere you want because the fundamental principles are in your body. So we did use it for all the athletes, but we used it in quite a specific way. And we took out certain things for certain players who we knew, have got these adaptations that we don't need to train them that way. When you're looking at a normal person like myself, like you want to have, you want to have your cake and eat it. You want the best of both worlds. You want a little bit of everything, because we're not going to, I am going to run away from a 900 kilo pack of rugby players as they try and go into a scrum. I am not running towards it, and I think that's really important. Like, what do you want to do? I want to be active. I want to be able to walk. I want to go hiking. I want to go swimming. I want to play with my friends' kids. I want to go to the gym. I want to be active and do lots of different variety of exercise, which gives my body. And so by doing a bit of gym, a bit of Pilates, a bit of this, I have resilience in my body and what I can do.
Mm-hmm. Training it in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And you said you will use it with the athletes in a specific way, and that's not how you would train someone else. But equally, within what we do, we're still training people in a particular way because we look at what they need. Yeah. We don't give the same thing to everyone.
No.
And that's the beauty of the one-to-one work
Yeah.
and the beauty of the equipment work. And us having backgrounds as physios mean we particularly assess everyone that comes in and can give them a really customised programme to what they need.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to be a physio. I know a lot of physios that, to be honest, are terrible at teaching Pilates, because it's like they suddenly forget what a movement is in their brain and start throwing out really stupid comments, and that's not how the body moves. So, to teach movement, you have to understand movement. If you're teaching someone with no injuries, no illnesses, no problems, if you understand movement, anybody can be a great movement therapist. If you've suddenly got injuries and illnesses and problems around that, you have to understand what's going on in the body and what are the likely changes, but also who might you need to draw on for help. And that's where sometimes having that medical expertise comes in. But the fundamental practice of teaching movement is that domino effect. At what point does the next thing have to kick in? Now, for every single person, that is different. And it has to be different because we all look different. We are all unique in how we act, think, feel, what we do, how we live our lives. So the way I would speak to you in a language that you would hopefully understand is going to be very different to the way I would speak to an 8-year-old child or a 98-year-old granddad or whatever. It has to adapt and it has to change. And exactly that is exactly what our bodies do. The beauty of equipment Pilates is that it has so much adaptability. And because you're providing feedback to people, they can feel it, which means you can replicate it. Because I had a client who constantly laughed at me every time I said this. You cannot think your way through a movement. You cannot think a feeling.
Were you talking about me?
No, I wasn't.
You also said the same thing to me.
Yeah, I say that a lot. I was talking about a gentleman that he was probably my age, mid-30s, would never have done Pilates in his life. If he wouldn't, if you looked at him, you wouldn't have thought that he would become to me. But he came to me because he was referred by a surgeon. And when I said that to him, he was a very analytical guy, very, very clever, and he just laughed. And then he just kept repeating it. But it's true. If I want you to be good at something, you can't in your head be like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. You can't do that. You've got to feel it because you can recreate feelings. It's like when you do a recipe and then you taste it and go, oh, it doesn't quite taste the same. So you add some bits and change it and you taste it again and go, oh yeah, it feels the same. It tastes the same.
Which is different to looking in the recipe book to try and figure out where I've gone wrong.
Exactly. Yes. So there is a recipe book, of course. But the ultimate thing is you have to feel it. If you can feel it in your body, you can put that anywhere. And that is such a powerful tool.
That's good movement teaching.
That's good movement teaching.
And so similar to yoga as well, really good yoga teaching helps you to feel it in your body.
Exactly.
And sometimes, like for us, our training might get in the way because it's a very cognitive endeavour, learning about anatomy and learning about this and learning about that. And Pilates isn't taught in that way. Well, it may be somewhere, but the way that we're learning it isn't. It is very much about do it yourself and learn it that way through doing.
Yeah.
Learn through doing and feeling.
Yeah, because we learn the most when things go wrong, when you're not sure about something, and when you question. We don't learn things because you're good at it. Because you've got no feedback to go, oh, well, how do I change something? Because you're like, oh, it's just great. I've got nothing.
So what people also need to understand when they come to learn exercises, that's what the learning is. You need to go on some sort of journey from A to B.
Yeah.
So, and part of that is making mistakes.
Yes. And that's one of the problems that we have, I believe, in the UK, is there is no fundamental baseline of training. You can go and do a 2-day course and call yourself a clinical Pilates instructor. And the reality is that you don't know enough. You haven't got enough experience because you haven't lived it, you haven't questioned it, you haven't explored it, you haven't played with it, you haven't been imagining what and how these links can create. You've done a course that means you can count to 10 and hopefully keep people safe. Anyone can do that, but that doesn't mean you can teach Pilates. That means that you can teach fitness, whatever that is that you're about to do, but it is not Pilates. And I feel quite strongly about that.
And Pilates is well, it's a massive system of exercise, isn't it? So that alone, you couldn't really cover in a 2-day course, could you?
No. But no one can pick up that much content. We all have content. Look on YouTube, go and find a whole load of different exercises and there's your content. Super easy. But do you fundamentally understand what it is that you are trying to achieve, what you're trying to do, how you might play with it, modify it, change it if somebody has had previous injuries, illnesses, is older, is younger? Can you take that movement and be like, I can put this into a million different places because I fundamentally understand the movement and what the body is capable of and what it's trying to do. There's no way you can do that in a short course. You have to have not only time with people to run through a course, you have to have time after it, because you cannot understand enough. We come out of physio uni knowing absolutely nothing. And then 15 years later, you're about getting there, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's the same thing with this. It is absolutely no different, because you are dealing with people who have inevitability. They get older. And when you get older, you get problems. You start hitting aches and pains and this and this and this. And if you don't understand what's going on, you will miss red flags. You will miss problems. You will miss referring people on early because you don't understand what's going on, because you can't spot it, you can't ask the right questions, and you don't understand it. And not having a good, solid foundation, which is, a lot of the good courses are sort of 16 months to 2 years to train to get your fundamental, I'm no longer a student, but then you're coming out of university, they're coming out of physio, you're coming out of physio school knowing very little, but at least you've got a starting point. If you want to do a 2-day course, don't bother.
Takes a lot longer to learn about
about
movement and learn about the body.
Yeah, and if you care and you're inquisitive and you understand, that's what you need. If you just want to make some money, crack on. Yeah,
but you need to actually be really engaged in what you're doing, so that you look at something and go, oh, isn't it quite right? Yeah. Can I change it? If I can't change it, I need to go and have a think about it, come back.
Yeah.
Or you could just do the count for 10. Yeah. We've done 10 of these exercises, we've done 10 of those exercises, and that's okay if you just need to get through an exercise class and get content in, but to really make it adaptable in the way that you're talking about.
And this is where I think that we've lost some of the understanding of what we do. So lots of people think that Pilates is just about a core, it's going to give you a six-pack, you should imprint, brace, hold your core tight, hollow, do all of this kind of stuff when you're moving. The reality of that is completely useless. So there is a time for bracing, and it's when you are in the gym doing an incredibly heavy movement and you are using that stiffness, that holding your breath and that bracing your core will give you stability under a massively high load.
So for like powerlifting,
massive squats, Olympic lifting, all of that kind of stuff, you need that extra cuddle, you need that pressure that you get.
Can you describe the bracing a little bit more?
Yeah, so you typically know it. So in the gym, you typically know it in a squat. So you take a breath at the top, hold as you sit down, and then puff out, blow out, exhale as you're coming up to standing. So effectively, you've filled this whole cavity in your center, which has then created this big pressure, which holds you together as you sit down. And then your breath out is like me going pop, and everything then goes poof, up together to create that power to lift. We know Pilates doesn't give you power. So if you are holding your breath, keeping your core tight, drawing in constantly, hollowing constantly, we know it's not going to help your movement. So just go back.
It's going to block your movement, because it's going to make you quite rigid.
Exactly.
And we're trying to get into this spinal mobility, because Pilates isn't all about just this.
Yeah.
You want to have that flexibility in your spine, and you can't do that when you're bracing.
It's giving you the control through movement. So if you want control through movement, You need to allow movement. So if we look at a really fundamental exercise, you lie on your back and you lift a leg and drop it back down again, or you have both legs up and you're doing little toe taps, okay? The number of people that imprint their spine, so they push their lower back into the floor. Now, all that's doing is it's kind of giving you like a smiley face type shape, so it's flexing your spine. This is not a spinal flexion movement, and we don't want to walk around all day like this. We want to walk around with these 3 natural curves in your spine. Now I am lying down and I am doing a hip dissociation, so can my hip move independently in my socket, a hip hinge. That is what this exercise is doing. Your hip flexors are working, so your quads and things will be working as well. You can't turn them off, you can't stop it. That is what lifts the leg. But what you're doing is you're looking for that slow lower, that whatever it might be. The body is staying relatively still. There'll be a little bit of rotation because it's inevitable when one leg moves and one leg doesn't. But we're trying to keep the relative natural curves the same, because I am standing up straight and I am lifting a leg to go up a stair. I am not lifting a leg and dropping down. That's an imprint spine. There is no actual link to function by doing that. All you're doing is training yourself in this position constantly, which means the minute you do this,
but more than that, when you imprint, you're generally ending up holding your breath again.
Yes.
And bracing again.
Yes. And our core is not just, so our core is our, you know, like we've talked about, the really deep stability system. It's everything. It's also your diaphragm. It's also your pelvic floor. They all kind of come together, and they are muscles too. And they have to work through their full range or they don't work. And this is why, so 1 in 3 women have incontinence, 1 in 10 men. The stats are getting worse. A lot of that isn't because of a weak pelvic floor. It's because we can't let it go. So the minute your bladder gets any liquid in it, and then you add a step or a jump or a run, and that downward pressure forces the bladder onto the pelvic floor can't let go, which means you leak. And that is a huge problem that we're having at the moment, because HIIT training, bracing, imprinting, holding your breath, all of that stuff, the stress and the natural high octane lives that we generally leads to this holding in. Pull your belly in, stick your chest out, right? That's how our grandmoms told us to stand. But that means that you are not working your muscle through full range. So stress it outside of what you're doing and you will have a problem because you don't have strength there. So if you don't have the training, how can you question things like that? Now, if I'm doing a chest lift, so a little baby sit-up, my head is coming up, my ribs are rotating, my spine is flexing, and at some point I've picked up and hit all the dominoes. That means my lower back gently meets the floor and my pelvis will tuck under. It is inevitable because I'm flexing from my tailbone to the tip of my head.
And the key is it's gentle, and it happens as a natural consequence of doing the other things.
Yes.
You're not trying to get the lower back on the floor.
It is a consequence of, it is showing you that your spine has its natural capacity, its natural ability to gently flex. And when you lay yourself back down again, it can unfold back into those 3 gorgeous curves that we keep, because that is where our spine is designed to be its most stable. It wants to move how it wants to move, so let it move. So then this comes down to the breathing. You must breathe by exhaling to lower the leg and inhaling to lift the leg. The reality of it is unless you're suddenly putting a lot of weight on you, it doesn't matter. Breathing does, how you breathe, when you breathe, where you breathe, it doesn't matter.
So we get this all the time.
Yeah.
People get really stressed out with Pilates because they've been given cues about their breathing and they're already thinking about too many things.
When do I breathe again?
And they can't do the breathing, and it's too much cognitive load, and it really stresses them out. And then they're a bit like you going to yoga and you're not flexible. They're like, I can't do the breathing, so I can't do Pilates.
And it all gets a bit much.
It all gets a bit much. But actually, we do want to cue you to breathe because we don't want you to hold your breath.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter as much as we might think it does of which way round you breathe. But you could also, in skilled hands,
yes,
use the breathing, and we were talking about this the other day, because you want to achieve a certain thing with it.
Yeah. So your breathing can facilitate your movement, okay? If you sit here right now and take a massive deep breath in, where do you go? You extend. If you take a massive big breath out, you flex.
True.
So we can use breath to facilitate where our spine goes. We can use breath to almost, if we go into a rotation, use your breath out to expand your rib cage to give you a little bit more accessory movement around your spine, so that when you come back, it feels a little bit easier. So you can use breath to encourage motion or to gain a little bit more motion because you're using these accessory movements. You can use breath to encourage stability. So if you are really, really mobile, you're quite deconditioned, you might use an exhale breath as you have something on the harder side of the movement because it gives you natural help.
And then you don't have to put in your tummy.
And then you don't have to put in your tummy because when you breathe out, your tummy goes down and everything comes together. Your sides, your pelvic floor, your diaphragm, your back, they all naturally work at a low level. Some of your deep abdominals sit in your spine, okay? So they all naturally work at a very low level. If you're breathing out and your tummy goes down and suddenly it goes pop, okay? So I kind of liken this to a bit of a lift situation, okay? When you're in a lift, when it's working well, it's rising, that's your in-breath. It's falling, that's your exhale breath. If you were to start to drop down, okay, really nicely, because we're breathing, and then suddenly your tummy goes pop and shoots up 10 floors, you would freak out. Ultimately, if you're starting to do this and you suck it down and it drops, you would freak out as well. All you need to do is let that lift rise and fall. It will naturally happen. It will come together. It will happen. Because trust me, that's how your body's designed.
That's another way that I like to use breathing, is to help with the timing of movement and to slow people down.
Yeah.
So if they're getting it, it can be quite nice to help with the flow.
Yeah.
We're always breathing in and out. We're normally doing Pilates movements at often this speed as well. But if they're getting too confused, it's going to interrupt with that. Yeah. But once they can get the breathing, it's a really nice device for helping with timing, flow, relaxation.
And remind me about speed in a second. And that if somebody is breathing and they're moving, you don't need to cue it. They are doing well. Because the reality is I want to be able to lift my leg on an inhale and an exhale. Nobody in their right mind does this. They switch off the telly and then they go, inhale to prepare, exhale to stand up. Nobody does it. It doesn't happen. If you are only teaching people to do a movement with a certain breath, where's the resilience? Where's the choice? Where's the options? You don't have it. Inhale to prepare. Nobody in their right mind, in the world, in normal movement, as they're standing up, turning around to do something, doing something, inhales to prepare. Prepare for what? A dinosaur's not going to eat me.
Prepare for the outbreak.
The elephant's not going to come and get me. And it's just...
I still say it because it's been programmed into me. And it is preparing for an outbreath.
But why?
You don't need to think about it so much. And quite often when it's my clients now, I just go, are you breathing? That's my first cue is, are you breathing? They go, no.
Yeah, and that's
and then we start breathing.
Exactly. But if they're already breathing, you don't need to even talk about it. Okay, it is an unconscious thing we do every day. Most people can do it. If they're not breathing, the question is why? Is it too hard for them? Are they thinking about things too much and so they've shocked their system into stopping things? Have they done so much of a specific type of exercise that they are very used to holding their breath? So then you need to look at that relaxation, that down training. It's all these different things. You telling them when to breathe is not going to give them options. It's not going to give them choices. They're never going to remember it because then they go, when did she tell me how to breathe? I couldn't do my homework because I couldn't remember when you told me to breathe. I mean, it's ridiculous. Just saying that is ridiculous.
Oh no, we've ruined it all. Ruined all the homework, I mean.
So this is the thing, we are trying to create this resilience, this autonomy, this give someone responsibility back so they can enjoy what they do and they can enjoy movement and being active. Power, strength and speed. To get power, you've got to move fast and then you've got to add load in order to create it. Control, stability. How fast you run a marathon as a normal person, not very fast. How fast do you run the 100 meters? Quite fast, because even if we're not, that quick, we can get there pretty quickly and we'll give it our all, right? You don't do that when you're starting out in a marathon. You go slow. You take it a bit easier because you got to get through the next 26 miles. And that is Pilates. Pilates is, we've talked about, it works on the entire core. That's not just your center. That is your front, back, sides, top and bottom across the whole of you. If you want to work those marathon runners, if you want to get control, if you want to build body awareness, you have to work slower, okay, fundamentally. You have to slowly work against that resistance, know what's happening, understand where it's going to be. Fundamentally, you can't be teaching power. You can't be adding it. So that simple difference of speed in your session is what Pilates is and isn't.
And it's really difficult for people to get because they're living their lives at get this done, get this done, get this done, and they're still getting the exercises done. And they cannot get the idea that it's okay to go slow or that they could be having any benefits if they're not exerting themselves. We think exercise is exertion and it's not.
And it's really important to understand because I go to and I understand reformer classes and you can go there and you work hard and it's heavy and it's this and it's this, but that fundamentally reinforces the lifestyle that you're leading. Hold it tight, brace, work heavy, go quick, go hard, get a sweat on.
And a movement pattern that might not be a very good hinge.
Yes, and you are only ever training one system. You are never giving yourself resilience, and at some point you will break. You can't stop it because you are changing the way your body wants to move and giving it so much that it's going to have to move a different way because that is what we are designed to do, and it is incredible. This is why you need variation and alternatives.
Movement variability.
Why you have to understand what things are good for. If you're going to a reformer fitness class, and that's what it is, it's a reformer fitness class, to get up a sweat, to work hard, to feel the burn, that's going to be that. Trust me, if you came to the studio, I could make you feel the burn, you feel like you're working really, really hard, and do 2 or 3 exercises unbelievably well, and you will never find them harder because you are working exactly how you should in that environment rather than just feeding into the same thing we always do.
And you'll be really surprised because you'll be like,
really surprised.
Why does that feel like that? Mm-hmm. It's never felt like that before. Mm-hmm. Mind blown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it can be lots of things. I believe that there is a difference between mat fitness, reformer fitness, equipment fitness, whatever you want to call it, and Pilates. There is a fundamental difference.
Yes. And it's really difficult to... Pilates is not a protected term, is it?
No.
So anyone can call themselves a Pilates teacher and that doesn't mean anything.
No.
Because, nobody knows what it means.
No. Because nobody understands the difference in training or what it can be. There is a lot of money behind reformer, particularly reformer group classes in the UK. There is a lot of private money behind it.
Yeah, and I guess that's going to be trained completely different than the old style mat, for example.
Yeah, and there is a lot of what I'm saying is a shift in what we think of in society. I think the shift is changing. I think people are becoming a lot more aware of you have to do different things. You can't always do the same. And I would like to think that if I gave someone a hammer and said, hit your head, and they did, and then I said, do it again, they wouldn't. So if you've got a problem, if you're leaking, if you've got pain, if you're going into a session of anything and you are getting pain when you're doing it, something is trying to tell you something. Something needs to change. because you wouldn't take that hammer and do it again.
But people don't understand the difference between good pain and bad pain.
Yes, and that is a whole thing in itself.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
I think that's a massive conversation. But fundamentally, if you walk out of a gym session, or you walk out of a reformer session, or you walk out of this, and your movement is detrimentally affected the rest of the day, the next day, I'm asking you why you're hitting your head with a hammer. Why aren't you asking questions, and why aren't you seeking a difference?
Because you don't know what else there is.
So try.
There's a bit of an image problem in that, people just think there's one thing that is Pilates, and it's not one thing, and it's not one delivery system. And on that note, there are several schools of Pilates training that are the more recognised, more well established.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they tend to be the more expensive ones because you pay for what you get, right? You don't go to a shop and buy a £1 winter coat and expect it to be as good as a £200 winter coat.
But at least you can know the difference between...
So it depends on what you want.
Primark and Armani, but nobody knows what the difference is with Pilates. No. As consumers of Pilates, you're not informed. You don't know what to look for. You need to look for someone that's been trained by one of these schools. You want to see that they've been doing it for a long time. They've got a lot of experience.
Yes. And
those kind of things.
Yeah, and we'll pop some links below to the different schools if there are any people who are interested in watching or just want to find out what their instructors kind of do. And obviously there's more, but there is a few in the UK that are really well kind of thought about and looked after. And I'm going to jump back to the conversation we were talking about a little bit earlier, and this might have been the last bit, but six packs. Pilates won't give you a six-pack. And I have heard it on TV, I've heard it on radio, I've heard it in the newspaper. It fundamentally will not give you a six-pack unless you have the right diet and the genetics that allow you to do it. I have trained pretty much every year of my life since I was about 9 years old. Okay, trained in terms of doing some kind of quite a lot of sport or going to the gym or doing Pilates and all of this, and I still don't have a six-pack. This is a very big genetic. You see this on Instagram all the time. All these girls in leggings, crop tops with these incredible stomachs, washboard tummy, defined lines.
But you can just put that on there by filters now.
You can filter it now, yeah.
You don't even need to bother.
But unless you are genetically made up to be able to look like that, forget about it. That is not most of us. And unless you have the genetics, I heard someone the other day saying, all I do is walk and Pilates. Great. The reason you look like that is because of your genetics, not because you walk and do Pilates. And that is really important to understand.
Or something else is going on that you've omitted to tell us about.
Exactly. And
or you haven't eaten anything for 10 years, because if you've got extremely low body fat,
you will have a six-pack.
You will have a six-pack, but that's not healthy.
Or, most athletes will have a six-pack. They eat really, really well. They train a lot, but they are athletes because they are genetically predisposed to being in this place. And so I think really take everything you hear with a bit of a pinch of salt, okay? Because I am strong and I am mobile within my own right. I will never, ever have a six-pack. I didn't when I was little. I didn't when I was, 2 stone lighter than I am now. When I was really slim, I still never had that six-pack. And so don't aspire to be like that. Understand that it will give you some of the type of strength that we've talked about. If you've never exercised before, if you are quite overweight, if you have a lot of body fat, it can help you lose weight because doing most movements will help you lose weight. And what's nice about Pilates, if you are a bit bigger, is that it gives you so much support. You can achieve so much more, you can do so much more, and you don't necessarily get the compression in your joints and that sort of stuff.
It's really it's like hydrotherapy.
It's like hydrotherapy.
But you don't have to get wet.
And wash your hair and do all that.
You don't have to find a pool, which are few and far between.
Yeah.
So,
it can help you lose weight if you are starting from a certain point. it can give you strength, as we've determined, about the control and that deep stability, kind of cuddle, mechanical side of it. But for me, it won't make me lose weight, because that I need to do my cardiovascular exercise. I need to sort out my diet and eat less cake, because I like cake. I need to, if I want to actually fundamentally make a change to the way I look now, because I'm healthy, I'm not overweight, I'm fit, I would have to change my diet to do that. Because I do the cardio, I do the strength, I do the stability, but I eat cake and I like alcohol, not to the excess, but I like to have some kind of sweet thing every day. Mm-hmm. So I would have to change a lot of that in order to make a fundamental difference. So again, yes, for some people it will help you lose weight. For a lot of people it won't. For pretty much no one it will give you a six-pack, unless you're lucky enough to be predisposed to those genetics and you eat in a certain way, which you've worked out kind of works for you as well. And so understanding that is also really important to understanding Pilates.
Yeah. That's not what you're there for.
No.
You want to move well, you want to strengthen your stabilizing muscles, you want to have flexibility and movement variability, you want to feel really like you've got a sense of mastery over your body, because you can do a lot of things. It's about functioning well, being healthy on the inside, and not so much of what looks good on the outside. It will probably help you to tone up a bit.
Because you're building a bit of muscle.
So you will look a bit better.
Because you're standing up straight normally, because you've gone from this to this, so everything just
improves
looks a
your
bit better.
postural awareness and things. So loads and loads of great benefits.
Yeah.
But a six-pack ain't one.
No. And always just remember that. You want resilience in your body. You want options and choices, so that if something does happen and you pick up an injury, you've got other things that can help along for the ride. And my biggest thing that I say to everyone, whether you're an instructor, whether you're a client, ask why. There is a reason every single one of the things that you do and the weird and wonderful exercises we can come up with links to your function, what you do on a daily basis, what your goal is, where you want to get to. Ask the why. No one should just be coming in and going, here's a head cushion, here's a ball, here's a band. And that's just lazy. Ask the why. Be that 2-year-old child. Be inquisitive. Question what's going on. Why will this help me? What will it make me better? Well, why am I feeling this in the wrong place when everyone else is feeling it there? Does that matter? Potentially no. Just keep asking those questions. Keep challenging, in a nice and a positive way, the people that you're surrounding yourself with, that you're being taught by. Because if their reaction is, oh God, I don't want to answer your questions, potentially there's a little bit of a gap in knowledge there. And then you can work together in order to figure out what that might be. Mm-hmm. But find your resilience.